Hey, Billy, are Korean and Japanese related languages?
Oh, no. Now, Korean and Japanese are two different languages spoken in two different countries, but they do have similarities with each other, leading some people to think that the two languages are closely related. But before we get started, I should say that I've studied both Japanese and Korean. Anyway, so let's talk about some of the ways that Korean and Japanese are similar and different. So Korean and Japanese have a lot of things in common and a lot of things that make them unique. First of all, here are some of the ways that Korean and Japanese are similar. Syntax means the order of words in a sentence, and Korean and Japanese both use a similar structure. In English, sentences are ordered by the subject, then the verb, then the object. For example, the man shot the gorilla. Here, the man is the subject, shot is the verb, and the gorilla is the object. But both Korean and Japanese are ordered by the subject, then the object, and then the verb. So the sentence, the man shot the gorilla, would instead be ordered, the man, the gorilla, shot. 남자가 고릴라를 쐈다. 오토코가 고릴라우 웃다. But both languages also have particles that seem similar. For example, in Korean you can use the particle 에 to say to a location, and you use it after saying the location. In Japanese, you can use the particle ni in the same way. So to say I went to the store in Korean and Japanese, it would be 가게에 갔어요, or in Japanese, 미세 ni ikimashita, both literally meaning store to went. And there are also other particles in both languages that have similar meanings like this. Now, this is probably the main reason why some people get the idea that Japanese and Korean are related to each other. A lot, and I mean a lot, of the vocabulary of both languages seems to be similar. For example, the Korean word for promise is 약속, and in Japanese it's yakusoku. The Korean word for relationship is 관계, and the Japanese word is 관계. Now, there are thousands and thousands of more words like these that sound similar, but there's a good reason for this. A long time ago, both Japanese and Korean took vocabulary words directly from the Chinese language, kind of like how the English language uses a lot of French words. So I ordered a baguette and an omelette a la carte from a cafe the other day, and when I left, the maitre d' said, "Au revoir." It felt like I was in France. A long time ago, becoming educated in Korea, such as to become a government worker, meant that you had to be able to read and write. But the Korean language didn't even have a writing system until the 15th century when Hangul was created. So before then, anyone who wanted to get an education would simply learn how to read and write Chinese. And Japanese also used Chinese characters for writing before they developed their own version of the characters. Because of that, a lot of the vocabulary from Chinese came over and entered Korean and Japanese. In fact, over 60% of all of the vocabulary in Korean originally came from Chinese. But this doesn't mean that Korean is related to Chinese or that Japanese is related to Chinese. Not at all. Because Korea and Japan and China are so close together, they've shared many things through their history, and in this case, a lot of vocabulary words. But these shared vocabulary words are not considered native Korean or native Japanese words because they were just borrowed from Chinese. So although Korean and Japanese have some similarities, they are not really related to each other beneath the surface. So let's take a look at a few reasons why. Korean and Japanese use very different phonetic sounds. The Korean language has a lot of sounds that Japanese people can't make without a lot of practice, such as the vowels all and ui, as well as double consonants and syllables that end in a consonant. Pwak. And the Japanese language also has some sounds that Koreans can't easily make, such as their tsu sounds, g sounds, and z sounds. Overall, the phonetic systems of the languages don't have a lot in common. And although I mentioned that many particles seem similar in Korean and Japanese, this doesn't mean that they're always interchangeable. Particles in Korean work differently than particles in Japanese. For example, in Korean, you can also use the particle 으로 to say that you went to a location. Japanese can do this too, with the particle 에. So the sentence, I went to school, in Korean could also be 학교로 갔어요, and in Japanese, 학교에 ikimashita. But the Korean particle 으로 can also be used to mean using or by or with, such as in the sentence, I wrote it with a pencil, which would be 연필로 썼어요. But the same sentence in Japanese couldn't use the particle 에. Instead, you'd have to use a completely different particle, 대. 엔피츠대 가키마시다. So this particle 대 can be used to mean using or by or with, just like the Korean particle 으로, However, it can also be used to mean at a location. So while some particles seem to match up in some cases, they're not interchangeable and they're not the same. And not just these particles, there are slight differences between every particle in Korean and Japanese. By native vocabulary, I mean words that didn't come into Korean and Japanese through Chinese. So let's take a look at some of the similarities between native Korean and native Japanese words. There aren't any. Native Korean and native Japanese words are nothing like each other. If the two languages were related to each other, even a very long time ago, this is where we would find similarities. Now, there are a few exceptions where linguists have found similar sounding words between native Korean and native Japanese, but these types of similarities aren't really unusual. If you search the internet for false cognates, you'll find a lot more between any two languages. Now, I'm not saying it's impossible that they're related, especially since Korea and Japan are so close together, but I am saying that there's no good evidence for it. Even though Korea and Japan are located so close together, Korean and Japanese are what's known as language isolates. Their origins are isolated from each other and they were created separately. This doesn't mean that the languages didn't influence each other, and they have, a lot throughout history, especially from the 1800s till the end of World War II. During that time, Korea was being ruled by the Japanese government, and a lot of vocabulary that was used in Japanese was brought over into the Korean language. One example is the word 전화 for telephone. Although this word uses Chinese characters and looks like it came from Chinese, it was actually made in Japan and then brought over into Korean. So Korea and Japan influenced each other, but the actual languages aren't related. There's a well-known theory called the Altaic languages theory that says that Korean and Japanese, as well as Turkish and Mongolian, are related to each other. But this theory has been widely discredited by linguists and doesn't really have much evidence to it. Even if it were true, it wouldn't show that Korean is related to Japanese, just that they're very, very distant relatives. So Korean and Japanese have many similarities, but they're not related to each other. And that's the end of this episode. Feel free to send me your own comments and questions, and I might make a video about them. And remember that new videos are uploaded here every week, so click subscribe and follow along. 그럼 다음에 또 봐.